It's Pastor John coming at you via video, once again due to quarantine. Well, in the book of Ephesians chapter 2 verse 19, the scriptures say that believers are no longer foreigners or aliens. Instead, they are fellow citizens and members of God's household. They are welcomed in, a part of the family of God. This is powerful stuff. We are connected as believers to one another. And one of the most powerful and valuable things that we do as believers is stay connected and be connected. And it's been a challenging thing to do that with quarantine, with the distancing, with not being able to gather at our church. It's been a bit of a drag. Nonetheless, it's still part of our challenge. And so, students, I hope that you'll be intentional about not isolating yourself, but reaching out and caring about others. We're going to take a few moments today to look at my, not my favorite, but one of my guiding passages in the scripture. It's from the book of Acts, chapter 2, verses 42 to 47. And really, verse 42 sums up the majority of the mindset here really, really well.
This is the way.
It says, talking about the very early Christians, the beginning of the church of God, it says that they were devoted to four things. One, the apostles' teaching, which we have today as what do we have today that we would call the apostles' teaching? The Bible. We have the scriptures. The early Christians were devoted to the apostles' teaching.
This is the way.
And that's super important for me and for you too. To know the principles that are in the scripture and to stay devoted to them, to believe them, to trust them. I hope you will. And to be people that help each other do that we don't just do it on our own, but that we do it together. The next thing in the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 42, they were devoted to the apostles' teaching. It says, and to the fellowship. That means they were devoted to each other.
This is the way.
They were looking out for each other, not just on their own. Later on, after verse 42, it says that they shared everything that they had. It says they had everything in common. That doesn't mean that they all like to wear the same thing. It doesn't mean that their favorite food was all bacon, like it should be. But it just means that they shared what they had. They took care of each other. They looked out for each other. They were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship. The third thing is to the breaking of bread. That's an interesting expression, and it refers to eating food together. They got together regularly to eat food, and it also refers to remembering Jesus. It's referencing the practice of taking communion. They were devoted to remembering Jesus all the time.
This is the way.
Maybe you have the practice already of praying before you eat a meal. And that's a good practice because it's pausing intentionally several times a day to talk to God and to say thank you. Well, remembering Jesus throughout our days, throughout our lives is super valuable and super helpful. I hope you'll do it. And the final thing in verse 42, it says, and to prayer. To prayer, to talking to God. As your pastor, if there's one thing that I could make happen in your brains, it would be that we would all spend more time focusing on, thinking about, and talking to God.
This is the way.
But I don't have the power to make you do it. Instead, all I can do is teach that the early church was devoted to it and tell you that something changes when we talk to God regularly. We have the practice of having Him on our mind and talking to Him. When I was in either late junior high or high school, I had a youth pastor, and he challenged me to stop talking to myself and instead start talking to God. What do I mean by that, talking to myself? Maybe you're like me and you have a voice in your head. Do you talk to yourself about what happens throughout your day? I can remember in my junior high years, I was very specific about talking to myself all the time. I can remember walking through the mall, and the mall had different colored squares. And I would try and make sure that my left foot stepped in the same number of black little squares as my right foot did. Maybe you had something like that. At night when I was going to bed, if I was taking off my slippers and I took off the right slipper first, then in the morning I would have to put on the right slipper first. I would talk to myself about it to make sure that it was fair for both feet. Do you do crazy things like that in your mind? Are you always thinking about stuff and talking to yourself about your day? My youth pastor challenged me to stop talking to myself and instead make that talking to God. About whatever you're thinking about whatever's happened, about whatever you feel like you want to say or what you should have said. And so I started trying to do that. And that practice is super helpful at helping God become more real to us. And not only just talking to him, but then we start to hear ideas that come back and they're like, is that from God? And if it's based on his truth, because we've been studying his scriptures, the apostles' teaching, and we know it, then we can realize that's an idea that's from God. I can dedicate myself to that. And then if we're talking to him regularly, we're going to be remembering Jesus. And then Jesus is going to be causing us to think about the people that are around us the most and be devoted to each other. So that's the key verse, that we would be people who are dedicated to the apostles' teaching, the scriptures, the fellowship, each other, the breaking of bread, which means hanging out with each other with meals, which we'll do again after COVID. But in the meantime, it means we're going to be remembering Jesus and helping each other remember Jesus all the time. And finally, prayer. Being devoted to having God on our minds and talking to him throughout our lives and throughout our days.
This is the way.